Welcome, everyone. It's your Sleepy Psychologist, and I'm so glad you're here. Wherever you are right now, take a moment to get comfortable. Maybe you're in bed, maybe you've dimmed the lights, or maybe you're just searching for something a little quieter, something slower, because tonight we're stepping away from the noise and into the strange, soft corners of thought. We'll explore one of the mind's biggest mysteries, something that might shift the way you see yourself, the world, or even reality itself. Before we begin, consider liking this video and maybe even subscribing, not just for me, but so this little corner of peace can find others who need it too. Now take a deep breath. Let the day dissolve. Let your thoughts get curious and your mind get quiet. You're exactly where you're meant to be. Now, let's begin. Imagine yourself walking slowly along a narrow trail, somewhere quiet and undisturbed, where the air feels thick with a kind of ancient stillness. Trees rise on either side like watchful sentinels, their leaves rustling gently with a rhythm that feels almost intentional. There is no urgency in your steps, just a steady, measured pace, as though the ground itself guides your movement. As you move, you become aware of a thought, quiet at first, like a soft tapping on a distant window. Did you choose this path, or did it choose you? This thought doesn't demand an answer. It simply lingers, like morning mist in a shaded glade. The idea of free will, of making choices that are truly our own, is one that we often accept without question, nestled deep in the assumptions of daily life. But when we pause, when we allow ourselves to drift into the quieter layers of thought, we begin to feel its complexity. Every action we take, every decision, seems to rise from within us. But what if it comes from somewhere deeper still, somewhere below awareness? Psychologists have long been fascinated by this. In laboratories with soft lighting and quiet hums of machines, they've studied the moment before we move, before we reach out, speak, or decide. In one well-known study, participants were asked to press a button whenever they felt the urge. Nothing dramatic, just a simple press. But as they waited for their own signal to act, electrodes recorded the brain's subtle murmurings. And time after time, it was the brain, not the person, that acted first. A small wave of activity appeared nearly half a second before the subject was even aware of their intention to press the button. It's a curious thing. The brain begins the dance, and only afterward do we feel we chose to move. This doesn't necessarily mean we have no free will, but it does suggest that the process is not quite as straightforward as we'd like to think. The sense of conscious control may be, at least in part, a story told to us by our own minds. A comforting tale woven from sensation and memory that allows us to feel like captains of a ship we may only partly steer. Still, this is not a reason for discomfort. Imagine the mind not as a machine, but as a forest, rich, layered, and alive with unseen processes. Under the soil, roots communicate through networks of fungi, exchanging messages and nutrients silently, constantly. Above, leaves tilt subtly toward the light, reacting to conditions they do not understand. And yet, when we see the forest, we see beauty, we see order, we see life. So too with the mind. Beneath awareness, countless systems hum gently, shaping our thoughts, our preferences, our inclinations, our early childhoods, our cultural landscapes, even the patterns of our ancestors. All of these lie beneath the canopy of awareness, guiding us without ever announcing themselves. And yet, we move through the world as though we are choosing each step. Perhaps it is not a contradiction. Perhaps free will, if it exists, is not a moment of decision, but a process, a layering of influences, choices, reactions, and beliefs, all converging on a single point that we call now. It is a comforting idea, in a quiet sort of way, that even if our decisions are not born in a flash of unshackled freedom, they are still ours. They emerge from the unique blend of experiences, thoughts, and feelings that make us who we are. So as you walk this path, imagined or remembered, notice the rhythm of your breath, the cadence of your thoughts. Notice how they do not come from nowhere, nor do they beg for control. They simply are. In this stillness, we begin to understand that free will may not be a switch we flip, but a river that flows quietly within, sometimes invisible, always moving. Let's continue to follow that current, gently, as we begin to explore the layers that shape the choices we make. As you continue walking along that quiet trail in the mind, you begin to notice how the path bends, not always at random, but often in ways that seem curiously familiar. Perhaps it reminds you of other walks you've taken, other places you've seen. There's a subtle rhythm to it, almost as if your footsteps are echoing decisions made long ago in places you barely remember. This is where we begin to explore the architecture of influence, the layered, quiet forces that shape what we perceive as choice. You see, before any decision is made, our minds are already filled with patterns. From our earliest days, we absorb. We absorb the tone of a parent's voice, the scent of home, the gestures and rules that govern our small worlds. These impressions become internalized, gently, persistently, and long before we learn the word decision, we are already being taught how to want, what to fear, who to trust. Cognitive psychologists call this priming. The environment, with all its soft signals, subtly guides our thinking. A person walking down a street lined with bakeries may feel hungrier than someone walking past a row of bookstores. Neither knows why. They may even insist they aren't influenced, but the scent, the atmosphere, the invisible cues, they reach into us without asking permission. Our thoughts seem spontaneous, but they often arise from soil laid down long before we even noticed. And these influences are not just momentary. Over time, they accumulate. Our culture, our language, our education, the small daily habits we inherit without realizing, all of these shape the framework in which our decisions occur. It's like being in a room you didn't design, full of furniture you didn't choose, and being asked to decide where to sit. You might move the chair slightly, but the walls do not change. The lighting is already set. Now imagine yourself standing at a counter, asked to choose between two nearly identical items. You pick one without much thought. Later, when asked why, you explain it was the color or the texture or some personal preference. But experiments show that often the object placed subtly to the right or slightly closer to hand is the one chosen more often. Not because of true preference, but because it was simply easier. Our minds often interpret ease as preference. This is known as the fluency effect, the tendency to favor what feels smoother, more familiar, less taxing. And yet, we feel it was our will that guided the choice. Still, there is no need to feel manipulated or trapped by this. These influences are not shackles. They are part of the quiet machinery of the mind. To understand them is not to lose freedom, but to gain insight. When you begin to see how the architecture is built, you don't become less human. You become more aware of what it means to be human. Because despite the influences, despite the patterns and nudges, you still exist in a space where reflection is possible, where you can step back, if only slightly, and observe yourself in the act of choosing. This capacity for metacognition, the ability to think about thinking, is one of the more fascinating aspects of consciousness. It is as though part of you can rise above the moment and look down upon your thoughts, gently, without judgment. This act of noticing doesn't erase the forces beneath it, but it adds a new dimension, awareness. And awareness, slow and quiet as it may be, introduces a kind of space into the process of the choice. A space where freedom may begin to take shape, not in the moment of decision itself, but in the reflection that surrounds it. So, as you continue along this imagined trail, consider how many signs you've passed without reading, how many winds have pushed you gently in one direction or another, and yet here you are, walking still, aware now, in a new way. The journey of understanding free will is not about answering the question all at once. It is about gently unfolding the layers, one by one, with curiosity. The path beneath your feet begins to even out now, smoothing into a gentle rhythm, much like the thoughts that rise and fall within the quiet of your mind. There's a familiarity in this rhythm, a comfort in the repetition, and that is no coincidence. Repetition is not only a source of calm, it is also a window into the deeper currents that steer our behavior. Now we step into the realm of habit and how it weaves itself silently into the tapestry of free will. When we speak of habits, we often imagine the mundane, brushing teeth, checking a phone, walking a familiar route. But beneath the surface, habits are far more than routine. They are patterns of thought and behavior that conserve effort. The brain, ever economical, learns to streamline the decisions we make repeatedly. Over time, what was once a conscious choice fades into automaticity, and yet we rarely notice when this shift occurs. Charles Duhigg, in his work on the science of habit, explains how the brain creates loops: cue, routine, reward. A small trigger prompts a behavior, which is followed by a reward reinforcing the loop. For example, you might feel bored, cue, reach for your phone, routine, and receive a small burst of distraction or pleasure, reward. Eventually, the act of reaching becomes automatic. You believe you are choosing to check your phone, but the behavior may have unfolded before you were even fully aware of the cue. This subtle automation doesn't only affect trivial matters, it extends into relationships, reactions, coping strategies, even moral choices. We develop habitual ways of responding to stress, to authority, to affection. These habits are formed over years, often through reinforcement and imitation. And while we still believe we are choosing in the moment, what we are often doing is repeating. The past, encoded in neural circuitry, plays itself out in the present. This is not a flaw in the mind. It is a strength. Without habit, we would be paralyzed by the constant need to evaluate and decide. But the consequence is that many of our so-called choices are no longer deliberate. They arise from paths carved into the brain by countless repetitions. And yet, the illusion of spontaneity remains. We feel as though we are acting freely, when in fact, we are following grooves worn deep by time. Consider a pianist playing a complex piece without looking at the keys. Their fingers move as if by instinct, flowing with grace and certainty. But that ease comes from practice, from habit. The freedom in performance is built on the discipline of repetition. So too with our decisions. We may appear spontaneous, but much of our behavior is scaffolded by habits we no longer consciously control. Still, this does not mean we are merely passengers, because habits, while persistent, are not immovable. The same brain that automates a behavior can, under the right conditions, unlearn it. Neuroplasticity, the ability of the brain to change, is a quiet force, always at work. When we bring awareness to our routines, we introduce the possibility of choice once more. And here again, that small space reappears, that soft pause between stimulus and response. It is in that pause, brief though it may be, that the potential for will resides. So as the trail ahead stretches quietly onward, notice the rhythm of your steps. Notice how easily your body knows what to do, how your thoughts follow familiar curves. And in that noticing, you begin to gently loosen the hold of habit. You do not need to change anything. Awareness alone begins to shift the soil. In this way, free will does not shout or leap forward. It whispers softly beneath the surface of repetition. It emerges not from constant newness, but from subtle shifts within the familiar. Let the rhythm continue. Let it carry you. And with each step, feel the quiet presence of awareness walking beside you. Beneath the quiet rhythm of your walk, below even the slow and steady breath you've come to notice, there is another presence, a deeper current, rarely seen but always moving. It does not speak in words or rise with urgency. It hums, silently, patiently. This is the unconscious mind, and it plays a profound role in shaping the story we tell ourselves about free will. When people speak of making a decision, they often imagine a moment of clarity, a weighing of options, a turning point, a conscious act of choosing. But the truth is quieter and more layered. Much of what we call a decision begins long before it reaches our awareness. The unconscious, that vast reservoir of past experiences, instincts, memories, and intuitions, is not just a shadowy backdrop. It is an active participant in nearly everything we do. And yet, because it is unseen, it is often uncredited. In experiments, individuals are asked to choose between two items, paintings, foods, faces. Later, they are asked to explain their choices. Almost always they do. They describe preferences, memories, associations. But when the experiment is altered, when choices are swapped without the participants knowing, they still explain the choice they didn't actually make. The unconscious mind, eager to preserve the illusion of authorship, provides a reason. This is known as confabulation. It is not deception. It is coherence. The brain seeks to preserve the narrative of self-direction, even when that narrative is quietly untrue. This might seem unsettling, but it's not. It's simply how the mind protects its own sense of stability. Like a ship correcting its course with subtle turns that no one aboard even feels, the unconscious steers beneath the surface, ensuring that life continues smoothly. It filters information, guides attention, manages emotion, and it does so without asking for thanks. Freud, despite the criticisms that have shadowed his legacy, was one of the earliest to suggest that we are not fully known to ourselves. He likened the mind to an iceberg, only a small part visible above the waterline. But it is the mass beneath that determines direction. Today's neuroscience echoes this metaphor. We now understand that conscious awareness occupies only a fraction of the brain's activity. Beneath it lies an ongoing process of evaluation, prediction, and preference formation. The unconscious is not mystical. It is mechanical, adaptive, complex, and yet its workings are still largely invisible to us. What feels like intuition, an unexplained preference, a sudden knowing, often stems from patterns the brain has detected long before the conscious mind could explain them. This means that free will, if it exists, does not originate in pure awareness. It begins deeper, in the slow accumulation of unconscious thought, shaped by everything we've ever seen, felt, or feared. We do not control this process, but we can come to recognize its influence. Imagine now walking this trail with a second figure beside you, not another person, but a part of you. A silent companion who sees more than you, hears more, remembers more. They do not speak, they only gesture. A nudge to the left, a pause at the fork, a feeling that something just feels right. That figure is your unconscious mind, not guiding you out of malice nor deception, but simply fulfilling its purpose, to keep you moving, to keep you alive, to keep you whole. And so we begin to see free will not as a solitary flame burning in the dark, but as a conversation between what we know and what we do not, between impulse and reflection, between the seen and the unseen. The more we acknowledge the role of the unconscious, the less control we may feel at first. But over time, this awareness becomes a form of freedom. Not because we command the depths of the mind, but because we begin to hear its whisper and recognize it for what it is, a guide, a builder of paths, a quiet architect of choice. As the trail continues, winding now through trees older than memory, you begin to sense the presence of something else, something vast, quiet, and behind you. It is not threatening, it does not hurry you, but it is there, the past. It follows gently, shaping the path without force, influencing each step not by command, but by momentum. The past is always with us, not only in the form of memory, but in the deep, unseen structures it builds into the mind. Our choices, though they feel rooted in the present moment, are often echoes, soft reverberations of earlier experiences, long past lessons, and quiet conditioning. The child who learned to stay silent in the face of conflict may grow into the adult who avoids confrontation without understanding why. The teenager praised only for achievement may carry a lifelong hunger for validation. These are not conscious decisions. They are shadows of the past moving just beneath the surface of now. In psychological terms, we call this conditioning, both classical and operant. Through repetition and consequence, the brain learns what to expect and how to respond. A sound followed by pain becomes a warning. A smile followed by praise becomes something to seek. These pairings, over time, shape not only what we do, but what we believe we can do. And beliefs, once formed, are powerful architects. If you believe you are bad at relationships, your decisions in love will reflect that script. If you believe you must succeed to be loved, your career choices will likely echo that pressure. In this way, the past narrows the future, not by force, but by suggestion. Even traumas, though often hidden, continue to shape the field of choices we see as available. What feels like intuition may be avoidance. What feels like confidence may be a mask. In every moment, the mind is consulting a library of past experiences, flipping through pages faster than awareness can follow. But we rarely question the source. We feel a decision rise and we accept it as present and personal. And yet, much of it is recycled. Still, the past does not have to be a prison. It can also be a map. The key lies in recognition. When you begin to trace the roots of your reactions, your fears, your preferences, you reclaim something small but meaningful. You begin to see the boundary between what was given and what can be chosen. Therapy, journaling, reflection. These are not just emotional tools. They are exercises in reclaiming authorship, in sifting through the inherited and the lived, the automatic and the deliberate. Neuroscience supports this too. When we recall an old memory, the brain does not simply replay it. It rewrites it slightly, a process called reconsolidation. This means that each act of remembering is also an opportunity for reshaping. Even the past, it turns out, is not entirely fixed. So imagine now that your trail opens into a clearing. You stop. You look back, just for a moment. The path behind you is marked not by stones, but by moments, decisions, accidents, lessons, regrets. Some were yours, some belonged to others, passed on without words. But they are there, all of them, still present in the rhythm of your steps. And yet, as you breathe, you realize you are still walking forward. The past is weighty, yes, but it is not destiny. To acknowledge its pull is not to surrender. It is simply to understand. And understanding, once again, opens the door to freedom, not sudden, not absolute, but slowly forming, like light shifting through leaves, revealing new possibilities with each step forward. The trail narrows now, winding between tall stones, their surfaces worn smooth by time and weather. It feels as though you are walking through memory itself, where each stone holds a moment, and each step is a ripple across the surface of your awareness. In this part of the journey, we turn towards the moment, the now, and the illusion that it is fully ours, because the present, while it feels immediate and clear, is not entirely what it seems. In reality, there is no pure now. What we perceive as the present moment is already a reconstruction, shaped by the mind's limitations and timing. Neuroscience tells us that our conscious awareness runs just slightly behind reality. The brain is constantly stitching together information from multiple senses, predicting outcomes, filling in blanks. This takes time, milliseconds only, but enough that the now we experience is already edited, softened, delayed, and still we believe we are acting in real time. This belief is comforting. It makes us feel immediate, decisive, real. But when we examine it closely, we see that our sense of timing, of presence, of initiating action is a subtle illusion. In the famous Leavitt experiments, participants were asked to move their hands at will while watching a clock. Researchers recorded brain activity and found that the readiness potential, the signal of decision, occurred before the participant reported having made the decision to move. This suggests that the brain begins to act before we become aware of the choice. The conscious mind, it seems, is not the beginning of action, but its witness. It observes and narrates, but does not always initiate. This can be disquieting at first. If we are not the origin of our choices, who or what is? But remember, there is no stranger making these decisions. It is still you, just not the you that lives in language and thought. It is the deeper, quieter you, the one formed from countless past moments, from memory and habit and instinct. That part of you moves first. The conscious self follows, often narrating a story that makes sense of the choice after the fact. The illusion of the moment is not a trick, but a simplification. The brain, always managing limited resources, simplifies time for our benefit. It edits, smooths, removes lag. We feel continuous, present, consistent. But in truth, we are stitched together across time. Consider how often your mind drifts. You might be in a room, hearing a voice, yet thinking of another place, another hour. The present moment is always partially constructed, a blend of memory expectation, and imagination. And yet, we base so many beliefs about free will on this fragile illusion of now. We say we chose something because we felt it in the moment. We say we acted on instinct or impulse or timing. But the moment is not a fixed point. It is a shifting perspective. It is not a platform from which we leap into action, but a lens through which we observe what has already begun. So as you walk along this part of the trail, notice the small delay between thought and action, between sensation and awareness. Notice how your mind fills in gaps without asking, smoothing your experience into a story. And ask yourself, not with urgency, but with quiet wonder, what part of me moved first? What part of me knew before I did? The illusion of the moment does not make your choices false. It simply reminds you that choice is a process, not a flash. That what feels immediate is often built slowly from layers unseen. And in that understanding, you may begin to find a new kind of freedom. Not the freedom of sudden choice, but the freedom of knowing the currents that shape you and the space that lives within awareness, even if it arrives just a breath behind the world. The trail begins to curve downward now, descending gently through a grove where the trees lean inward, their branches forming an arch that filters the light. It is a place that feels enclosed, introspective, like the inside of a thought slowly forming. As you walk, you become aware of something subtler than movement, subtler even than breath, a stirring, quiet, but persistent at the center of your being, desire. It is from this quiet stirring that many of our choices seem to emerge, and yet we rarely question where desire itself comes from. If we are to understand free will, we must ask not only who chooses, but what we choose for. Desire is not random. It does not appear without cause. It grows from need, from memory, from the environment, from personality. Each desire you feel is a response to something or to the absence of something. Some desires are loud, hunger, safety, affection. Others are softer, woven into the fabric of your identity. The desire to be seen, to be right, to be free. These deeper desires often go unnamed, yet they guide behavior with remarkable force. You may think you are choosing to take a job, move to a city, or reach out to someone, but often the choice was set in motion by a desire that formed long before the moment of decision. Perhaps it was the longing to prove yourself, or the need to feel safe, or a yearning for connection that had been quietly growing since childhood. And so the question arises, if we do not choose our desires, can we truly say we choose our actions? The philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer once wrote, "A man can do what he wills, but he cannot will what he wills." In other words, you may have the freedom to act upon your desires, but you did not choose those desires in the first place. They appeared. They settled into you like seeds carried on the wind. Still, even if desires arise unbidden, they are not beyond awareness. And awareness, once again, is the key. When you begin to notice a desire as it forms, not just its surface but its roots, you begin to understand its weight. You begin to see whether it is new or old, urgent or habitual, authentic or inherited. And in that noticing, something shifts. The desire does not disappear, but it becomes less invisible. It becomes something you can examine rather than something that steers you in silence. This is not easy. The mind does not easily untangle its own motives. We often mistake desire for identity, assuming that what we want is who we are. But just as the body hungers and is not the hunger, the self can experience desire without becoming it. And when we can create that space, even the smallest space, between the self and the wanting, we begin to choose differently. Desire may still move us, but we can ask, is this truly what I want, or simply what I have learned to want? Is this desire aligned with my deeper values, or merely the echo of an old wound? In asking these questions softly, without urgency or judgment, we loosen the grip of unconscious longing. We begin to differentiate between the desire that guides us forward and the desire that loops us endlessly through old patterns. So as you walk beneath the arching trees, feel the gentle pull of your own longings, not to act on them now, but simply to notice. Where do they rest in the body? How long have they lived in the mind? What voice do they speak in, and whose voice does it resemble? Desire is not the enemy of free will, but it is often mistaken for the will itself. To understand its nature is to regain a fragment of freedom, a small light that allows you to see not only where you are going, but why. And with that knowing, the next step on the path begins to feel just a little more your own. The ground beneath your feet becomes softer here, muffled by fallen leaves and moss, as if the earth itself were cushioning each step. Around you, the forest grows denser, but also quieter. The silence is not emptiness. It is full, thick with unseen life, gentle movements, and the quiet weight of presence. In this silence, we turn to the influence of the environment, not as an obvious force, but as a silent sculptor, shaping choice through context rather than command. We often imagine ourselves as separate from our surroundings, as agents acting within a setting, but not shaped by it. But the truth is quieter and deeper. Environment does not simply contain us, it forms us. It creates the field in which thought grows, in which decisions unfold. Consider the way light affects mood, or how architecture shapes movement. A narrow hallway leads differently than an open plaza. A cluttered desk invites one kind of thought, a bare room another. These are not preferences, they are responses shaped unconsciously, and they extend beyond physical space. The social environment, who we are with, how we are seen, what is expected, carries an equally profound weight. Studies in behavioral psychology have shown that even the smallest environmental cues can dramatically influence behavior. A room scented with citrus can increase honesty. A hot drink in the hand can make a stranger seem warmer. When people are observed, they behave more ethically. When they believe they are anonymous, they often drift toward impulse. The environment speaks in symbols and signals, many of which we no longer hear. It tells us what is safe, what is acceptable, what is rewarded. And in listening, we adapt, sometimes without noticing. The concept of choice architecture illustrates this beautifully. In public health or design, subtle changes, like the placement of healthy food at eye level, can dramatically shift behavior. The person still chooses the fruit, but the choice was shaped by what was made easier, more visible, more immediate. The illusion remains, but the conditions of the decision were carefully constructed. And so, we ask again, if the environment shapes our preferences, if it nudges us towards certain outcomes, what remains of free will? Perhaps more than we fear, but less than we assume. Because freedom does not lie in rejecting influence, but in becoming aware of it. Once you see how the environment shapes behavior, you can begin to work with it rather than for it. You can rearrange your own surroundings to support the choices you wish to make, rather than the ones imposed by convenience or habit. You can notice how certain people, places, or digital spaces alter your thinking, You can soften the influence or step outside of it. And in doing so, you gain a kind of leverage, not over the world, but over your place within it. Imagine now that the trail leads you to a clearing filled with objects, sounds, and figures. Some you recognize, others feel foreign. Each one holds a kind of weight, a pull. You are free to move through this space, but not without being drawn. The freedom lies not in resisting every pull, but in recognizing which ones align with you and which do not. To see the environment not as background, but as participant, is to deepen your understanding of choice. Every space you enter, physical or psychological, will shape you. But with enough awareness, you may begin to shape it in return, not dramatically, not instantly, but slowly, quietly, like water wearing away stone. And as you take your next step through this forest of influence, you do so not blindly, but with eyes open. The path is still yours, even if the winds have helped carve it. The trail begins to split in subtle ways now, not into stark forks or crossroads, but into meandering strands that weave and rejoin, like streams flowing through soft earth. There is no signpost, no announcement, only a quiet invitation to consider a truth we often overlook. The idea that we are one single unified self. Most people live with the assumption that there is a singular I who chooses, who wants, who acts. A consistent person, stable across time, rooted in identity. But when we look closer, we begin to see the self as more fluid, more layered. Not a single voice, but a chorus. Not one mind, but many threads of thought and emotion, coexisting, sometimes in harmony, often in quiet conflict. Psychology has long explored this. We speak of parts of the self: inner child, inner critic, ideal self, shadow. These are not metaphors alone. They reflect the real fragmentation of experience, the way different parts of us respond to different situations, sometimes with opposing desires. You may want to rest and also want to succeed. You may long for intimacy and simultaneously fear vulnerability. These contradictions do not make you broken. They make you human. In neuroscience, this complexity is mirrored. The brain is not one unified system, but a collection of networks, emotional, rational, sensory, instinctive, all interacting, influencing, negotiating. Decisions often arise from these internal negotiations, not from a singular command. And yet, after the fact, the mind weaves a story that smooths the edges, presenting a single, coherent narrative. We believe we chose calmly, reasonably, with clarity. But often, the decision was the result of many voices within us, some loud, some quiet, some shaped by logic, others by fear or memory or longing. The concept of the modular mind expands on this. It suggests that different mental modules are activated by different contexts, each temporarily taking charge. The self at work is not the self in love. The self in grief is not the self in joy. And though these selves are connected, they are not identical. The sense of unity is a story the brain tells to keep life navigable. It is useful, but not always true. So, where then does free will reside if the self is not one voice but many? Perhaps it lives not in the moment of choice, but in the space between voices, in the awareness that you contain multitudes and that you can sometimes choose which part of you gets to speak. This is not absolute freedom. It is not control in the traditional sense, but it is a kind of inner leadership, a quiet act of curation. You can notice which voice is rising, perhaps the one shaped by fear or pride or hunger, and choose to pause, to listen for another. Not always, not perfectly, But sometimes, and in that sometimes, there is room for will. Imagine now, walking this section of the trail, that you hear many footsteps alongside yours. Some are quicker, some slower, some familiar, others faint echoes. They are all you, parts of you, past versions, future possibilities, forgotten aspects, hidden strengths. They do not argue, they walk, and you, in this moment, are the one who notices. You do not need to silence them. You only need to listen, to understand that choice is not made by a single voice, but by the self who chooses which voice to follow. And perhaps that is what free will truly is, not the invention of choice from nothing, but the quiet ability to choose from among your many selves, which one you will trust to take the next step. The forest begins to open slightly here, revealing distant hills through breaks in the trees. There is a sense of wider space, and yet also a shift in atmosphere, something more intimate, more internal, as if the path has curved inward, asking you to notice not the world around you, but the emotional landscape within. Emotion, after all, is not just a passenger in our decisions. It is both compass and constraint. It is a quiet guide and a firm gatekeeper, and it shapes our sense of free will in ways more profound than we often realize. Emotions are immediate. They rise quickly, often before we can name them. A flicker of anxiety, a pull of longing, a quiet sense of peace or dread. They color our perceptions, framing choices as safe or dangerous, wise or foolish, desirable or wrong. We like to believe we choose based on reason, that our logic stands separate from our moods. But this is rarely true. Research shows that emotion often precedes reasoning. The gut reacts, and only afterward does the mind construct a rationale. In this way, emotion acts as the lens through which we interpret possibility. When we are calm, we see more options. When we are afraid, the world narrows. Possibilities become threats. Risks loom larger. Even the familiar can seem foreign. It is not that we have fewer choices. It is that our emotional state obscures them. Fear especially is a powerful filter. From an evolutionary standpoint, fear exists to protect us. It reduces complexity, speeds up decisions, pushes us toward safety. But in modern life, this same mechanism can limit growth. Fear of rejection may silence us in moments that call for honesty. Fear of failure may steer us away from meaningful pursuits. These are not irrational fears. They are learned and often justified. But when left unexamined, they shape behavior in quiet, persistent ways, narrowing the field of action without our conscious consent. At the same time, emotions are not only constraints, they are also signals. A sense of discomfort may point to a hidden truth. Joy may reveal alignment. Sadness may mark something valuable that was lost. When we treat emotion not as an obstacle, but as information, we begin to understand it differently. We begin to ask, what is this feeling trying to tell me? Not what should I do with it, but what does it reveal? In doing so, we create distance, not detachment, but perspective. And in that space, we find room for reflection. This is where the relationship between emotion and free will becomes most delicate. You do not choose your emotions. They arise. They wash over you, but you can choose how to respond to them. This is the practice of emotional regulation, not repression, not denial, but quiet observation and thoughtful engagement. To feel anger without acting on it. To feel fear and still move forward. To feel joy and allow yourself to rest there without guilt. These are not acts of control in the harsh sense. They are acts of grace. Soft decisions made within the emotional storm. Imagine now, walking further down the trail, that weather begins to shift. A gentle rain, a sudden gust, a brief flash of sun through the trees. Each change alters how you walk, how you see, how you feel. But the path remains. The environment moves through you, but does not define you. So too with emotion. It shapes perception. It stirs action. But it does not have to dictate direction. The more you learn to notice emotion without being swept away, the more space you create for choosing, not instead of feeling, but alongside it. In that space, between emotions rise and the story you build around it, lies something tender and important. A choice. Quiet, fragile, but real. The path stretches onward now, flatter for a while, and lined with small stones arranged in curious patterns. At first, they seem random, but with time, you begin to notice the faint outlines of symbols, traces of meaning gently etched into the earth itself. This part of the journey brings us to something both familiar and easily overlooked: language. The words we use, silently and aloud, are not just tools for communication. They are frameworks for thought, and they shape the way we perceive choice. Language is so deeply woven into our consciousness that we often mistake it for thought itself. But thought can exist without words. Emotion, image, sensation. They all arise before we describe them. And yet, once we do give them language, they take on form, weight, definition. Words do not merely reflect reality, they sculpt it. The philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein once wrote, "The limits of my language mean the limits of my world." In this light, the vocabulary available to you becomes the palette from which you paint your reality. If you do not have a word for a feeling, it remains blurry. If you cannot articulate a desire, it becomes harder to pursue. If a culture lacks a word for a concept, its people may not even recognize the concept as real. This has profound implications for free will, because the stories we tell ourselves, the inner narration that follows us from moment to moment, are built from language. When we say, "I had no choice," or "I always mess this up," we are not just describing reality. We are reinforcing a structure, a belief, a path. Cognitive behavioral therapy explores this deeply. It teaches us to examine the automatic thoughts that arise, to question the words we use, especially the ones that feel unquestionable. Words like always, never, should, must. These are not just expressions. They are constraints, walls built of syllables that narrow the range of imagined possibilities. But language can also liberate. The simple act of rephrasing a thought from "I can't" to "I haven't yet," from "I failed" to "I learned something difficult," can subtly shift the mind's relationship with itself. The emotional tone changes, the self-image changes, and with it, the willingness to try again. Even metaphors matter. To say "I'm stuck" feels different than "I'm in a season of stillness." To describe anxiety as a wave rather than a trap offers a pathway through it. Words, in this way, are not passive. They are directional. They influence the next thought, the next mood, the next decision. Even the language others use toward us shapes us. The child told they are resilient begins to act resilient. The adult told they are difficult may begin to withdraw. And in the echo chamber of internal dialogue, these words repeat long after the speaker has gone. So imagine now that the trail is not only made of earth and stone, but of sentences, phrases you've heard, beliefs you've absorbed, words you whisper to yourself without realizing. Some uplift, some burden, some are not yours at all, inherited without consent. You cannot erase them all, nor must you. But you can begin to choose which ones to carry forward. You can notice which words light the way and which ones quietly dim it. To become aware of language is to begin to rewrite the narrative of the self, slowly, carefully, not with grand declarations, but with gentle edits. And in this act of rewriting, even if the ink is invisible, you exercise a form of will, not over the world, but over the frame through which you see it. The trail begins to widen here, opening into a vast plain that stretches in all directions. From where you stand, it seems as though you could go anywhere. The horizon is expansive, the possibilities endless. It feels freeing, even exhilarating. But beneath that initial sense of openness lies a quiet paradox. Because sometimes the illusion of infinite choice does not liberate, it overwhelms. We live in a time where freedom is often defined by the number of options we have. More choices mean more control, we're told. And yet, studies in psychology suggest otherwise. Barry Schwartz, in his work on the paradox of choice, showed that when people are faced with too many options, they often experience more anxiety, more regret, and less satisfaction. The abundance of choice can lead to paralysis, not freedom, but doubt. We fear choosing wrongly, not because the wrong choice is catastrophic, but because it means giving up all other possibilities. This fear of missing out, quiet, persistent, can make even the simplest decisions feel weighted. In this way, the mind treats each choice as a doorway, and every unopened door becomes a small imagined life we never lived. And with each decision, no matter how small, something's left behind. We grieve not only what goes wrong, but what might have been right. This is not always conscious. Sometimes it's a faint restlessness, a hesitation, a sense that no option feels truly satisfying. The freedom to choose becomes a burden of endless comparison. And so, the question of free will shifts. Not just whether we can choose, but how we bear the weight of choosing. Too much freedom, unanchored by purpose or clarity, can become a kind of quiet prison, walls not made of rules, but of expectations and possibilities. In this space, the mind often searches for shortcuts, heuristics, familiar patterns, defaults. We choose what we've chosen before, not because it's best, but because it relieves the pressure, and so the illusion of infinite paths slowly collapses into habit, repetition, or avoidance. But there is another way to view this, not as a loss, but as a return. Instead of chasing the endless horizon, we might begin to look inward, asking not, what are all my options, but which of these aligns with what matters to me? When you know what anchors you, your values, your intentions, your deeper truths, then choice becomes clearer, not because there are fewer options, but because some no longer matter. The field of possibility narrows, not by force, but by relevance, and in that narrowing, choice regains its meaning. Imagine now that the vast plain around you begins to shift, not closing in, but clarifying. The grasses part to reveal a handful of small trails, each leading in a different direction, none marked, but each distinct. You could walk any one of them, but rather than ask which one is best, you ask which one feels true. And that quiet shift from best to true changes everything. It does not guarantee ease, it does not promise success, but it relieves the burden of trying to live all lives at once. You will never explore every path, but you can choose one with intention, and that perhaps is the essence of free will in a world of infinite doors. Not the power to open them all, but the courage to close most of them softly in order to walk fully through just one. The trail narrows once again, weaving through tall grass that sways gently in the breeze. The landscape slows. The silence deepens. There is a stillness here, not of emptiness, but of waiting. A pause, natural and unforced, as if the world itself is taking a breath. This part of the journey invites you to notice something subtle, easily overlooked in a life filled with immediacy and noise, the power of delay. Not delay as avoidance, not procrastination, but delay as an active, intentional choice. A conscious holding back, a deferral of action, not because we are uncertain, but because we are listening more deeply. In the quiet mechanics of free will, the ability to delay may be one of its purest expressions. We often think of free will as decisive, quick, powerful. The ability to act at once, to choose instantly, to move forward with conviction. But some of our truest decisions, the ones that shape us most deeply, do not emerge in a flash. They arrive slowly, through the space we create when we pause, when we do not rush to respond, when we allow time to work its quiet alchemy. Delay creates a kind of space for other thoughts to surface, space for emotion to soften, space for hidden motives to be seen more clearly. It is within this space that awareness grows, and with awareness, choice becomes more than reaction. In psychology, this capacity to delay is closely linked with executive function, one of the mind's highest forms of regulation. It's the part of us that stops the hand before it reaches for the third cookie, that holds back the sharp retort, that lets the email sit in drafts until morning. It's quiet, often unnoticed, but profoundly powerful. The famous marshmallow test, often used to study delayed gratification in children, showed that those who could wait, those who could resist the immediate reward in favor of a greater one later, tended to perform better in many areas of life. But beyond performance, what this reveals is a deeper truth. The ability to delay isn't about willpower alone. It's about how we understand time, how we tolerate uncertainty, and how willing we are to sit with discomfort without resolving it prematurely. And this matters deeply for free will, because the ability to delay is, in many ways, the ability to reclaim authorship over time. When we rush, we are often pulled forward by habit, by emotion, by unseen pressures. But when we wait, when we slow our inner pace, we re-enter the moment with presence. We begin to notice what we might have missed, the fear beneath the urgency, the memory beneath the anger, the softness beneath the resistance. Even a few seconds of pause can shift an entire outcome. A breath before speaking, a glance inward before acting. These moments are small, but their effects ripple outward. In delay, we begin to disentangle ourselves from the automatic. We shift from being moved to becoming the one who moves. This does not mean every decision must be slow, but it means that slowness, when chosen, becomes a tool of consciousness. Imagine now that your trail leads to a quiet glade. The air is still. There is no path forward yet, just an open space, undefined, inviting. You could walk immediately. You could choose now. But you also have the option to sit, to rest, to wait. In that waiting, you're not doing nothing. You are listening to your thoughts, your feelings, the shape of the moment. You're making room for yourself to arrive fully before the next step is taken. And that is what delay offers. Not weakness, not hesitation, but integrity. The ability to move when the moment is ripe, not simply when it presses. To hold your own timing, even when the world demands urgency. To let choice ripen in silence, until it becomes not just an action, but an expression of who you are. The path begins to wind once more, now bordered by symbols carved into stones, half hidden in moss, partially worn by time. They are not commands, nor warnings, just remnants of ideas passed from mind to mind, generation to generation. You begin to feel the presence of something larger walking alongside you, not a person, not even a voice, but a system of ideas, shared meanings, silent rules. This is culture. And as you move through it, you begin to sense how deeply it moves through you. Culture is not something we observe from a distance. It is the air we breathe, the structure of the stories we tell, the rhythm of what feels normal, expected, good. It gives us language, gestures, rituals, but it also gives us templates for choosing. And this, perhaps more than anything, is where culture shapes free will, not by removing choice, but by pre-selecting what we are likely to choose. We often imagine our preferences, values, and behaviors as personal, but many of them have been shaped slowly, invisibly, by the culture we inhabit. Consider how different societies frame the self. In some, autonomy is prized, individuality celebrated, and personal freedom viewed as a moral good. In others, harmony is valued, duty is central, and decisions are measured by their effect on the group. Neither is right or wrong. They are simply different frameworks. But these frameworks shape how we define free will. In an individualistic culture, saying no might be viewed as empowerment. In a collectivist one, the same act might be seen as selfish or disruptive. And so, before we even reach the moment of choice, the cultural lens has already tinted the possibilities. This influence is not always oppressive. Culture provides guidance. It orients us. It creates meaning through shared understanding. But like a map that only includes certain roads, it can also limit what we think is possible. The goals we pursue, the roles we adopt, the emotions we allow ourselves to express, they are all shaped in part by cultural expectations. Even our sense of time, of progress, of success is filtered through this lens. Psychologists studying decision-making across cultures find profound differences. A person from one culture might choose based on personal preference. Another might choose based on family expectation. Both may feel they are acting freely, but their definitions of freedom differ. So where does free will reside in a culturally scripted world? Perhaps in the moment we begin to see the script, the moment we notice that what we call normal is not universal, that our assumptions, while deeply felt, are not inevitable. This awareness does not exempt us from culture, but it allows us to question, to reflect, to engage more consciously with the values we carry. Imagine now that the trail opens into a garden shaped by many hands, some paths paved in stone, others grown wild. You walk among them, noticing which roots feel familiar, which ones were chosen for you, and which ones you've never even considered. The garden is beautiful, but it is not neutral. It has been cultivated with intention, by history, by belief, by power. And you, whether knowingly or not, have been shaped by its design. But now you walk it with awareness. You begin to ask, which parts of this garden feel like home and which ones feel like inheritance? Which choices are truly mine and which ones have I agreed to simply by living here? These questions do not require immediate answers, but asking them is itself a kind of freedom. Because when you begin to see culture as a force, not just around you but within you, you can begin to participate in it differently. You can choose when to follow and when to question, when to preserve and when to reshape. And that perhaps is the quietest kind of free will, the ability to know the difference between what you've chosen and what you've absorbed. The trail grows more intricate now, curving gently through a series of stone arches, their edges softened by time. Each step feels more deliberate here, more weighted, as if the ground itself is asking a question with every footfall. And so we arrive at a deeper inquiry, not only whether we are free, but whether we are responsible. If so much of what we do is shaped by unseen forces, biology, habit, emotion, culture, then what does it mean to hold someone responsible for their actions? What does it mean to hold ourselves responsible? This question is not only philosophical, it is profoundly human. Every society, every legal system, every relationship relies on the belief that people can choose their actions. Without this belief, praise and blame lose their meaning. But in psychology and neuroscience, the concept of responsibility becomes more complicated. When we look closely at the brain, we see patterns of cause and effect. A person with damage to certain brain regions may lose impulse control, empathy, or emotional regulation. Their behavior may change radically. Do they still choose? Are they still to blame? The answer is rarely simple. Even in less dramatic cases, behavior is influenced by countless prior conditions: genetics, upbringing, trauma, sleep, stress. Each moment is the product of thousands that came before, and yet most people feel that they are choosing. And this feeling, this internal sense of agency, is crucial. We live as if our choices matter, and often they do. Even in a determined world, there are spaces of uncertainty, of plasticity, of potential. These are the spaces where growth happens, where people change, learn, reflect. Responsibility, then, may not rest on absolute freedom. It may rest on capacity, the capacity to reflect, to understand, to respond differently over time. A young child is less responsible than an adult. A person in a moment of intense fear or trauma is less able to choose than one in calm reflection. We know this intuitively. Responsibility is not binary. It exists on a spectrum. And understanding that spectrum allows us to hold compassion and accountability at once. We can recognize the weight of someone's past while still expecting them to grow beyond it. We can forgive ourselves for choices made in ignorance while still committing to wiser ones in the future. Imagine now that your trail leads you to a bridge. Below, a river moves steadily, carrying leaves and twigs and memories. On the far side of the bridge is a place you haven't yet seen. But before you cross, you pause. You think of where you've come from, the reasons you've chosen what you've chosen, the mistakes that shaped you, the times you thought you had no choice at all. And still, here you are, choosing again. Responsibility, in this sense, is not about blame, it is about presence. It is about stepping into the current of your life with eyes open, even if you did not choose the river, even if the current is strong. To be responsible is not to control everything. It is to respond to what you can, with care, with attention, with awareness. This is not easy. It requires self-honesty. It requires patience. It means holding yourself accountable not through guilt, but through gentle intention. It means recognizing the forces that shape you and still deciding how to meet them. In this way, responsibility becomes the practice of free will. Not perfect, not absolute, but real. In every step taken consciously, in every moment of reflection, in every small act of choosing with intention, we affirm that we are not merely what has happened to us. We are also what we become in response to it. The trail now grows more subtle, winding through a landscape that is neither forest nor field, but something in between. You might not have noticed the transition if you weren't paying attention. The changes are not loud, not dramatic, just the quiet drift of texture beneath your feet, the way the light slants a little differently, the way the air has lost its earlier chill. And that is what this part of our walk is about. Not the big, deliberate turning points, but the soft momentum of things left unquestioned. The drift of the default. So much of life does not feel like choosing. It feels like continuing. Waking up, doing what we did yesterday, reacting in ways that feel familiar. We move through routines not because they are best, but because they are known. The brain, efficient and ever focused on survival, favors energy conservation. It prefers to run what is already programmed, and so we default. We brush our teeth the same way. We check our phones without thinking. We sit in the same chair, follow the same route, respond to the same provocations with the same words, the same tone. Even in more complex arenas, relationships, work, personal growth, the drift continues. We stay in patterns that once served us but may no longer do so. We stay in roles we didn't consciously audition for. We tell ourselves the same internal stories, not because they are true, but because they are easy. The psychologist Daniel Kahneman distinguishes between two systems of thought. System 1, which is fast, automatic, instinctive, and System 2, which is slower, more effortful, more deliberate. System 1 runs on defaults. System 2 questions them, but System 2 requires energy, attention, and so unless something jars us awake, some crisis, some unexpected detour, we often let the first system drive, not out of laziness, out of efficiency. The mind has limited bandwidth, and the default saves it for moments of perceived urgency. But in doing so, we often surrender our agency not all at once, but piece by piece. And over time, those small pieces become alive. This does not mean we are helpless, but it does mean that free will is not exercised by default. It must be awakened, intentionally, repeatedly. Consider how many decisions in your life were not really made, but inherited. The belief systems you were raised with, the ways you handle conflict, the things you consider polite or rude, good or shameful, acceptable or off limits. These defaults are not inherently wrong, but they are not inherently yours either, not until you've looked at them, not until you've asked if they still fit. In design, there's a term, choice architecture. It refers to the way decisions are structured for people, how the design of a menu, a form, a layout can subtly guide what someone picks. The same principle applies to life. We are constantly moving through invisible architectures of choice. The workplace layout, the structure of our daily time, the language we were taught to use for feelings, for identity, for possibility. All of it shapes what feels natural. And what feels natural, we often mistake for what is right. So, what does it mean to exercise free will in a life of defaults? It begins not with rebellion, but with noticing, with slowing the walk just enough to ask, did I choose this or did I continue it? Is this rhythm my own or is it something I fell into while trying to stay afloat? You do not need to break every habit, question every belief, change everything all at once. That too would be a kind of default, an overcorrection, a response to discomfort. Instead, free will shows itself in the soft, repeated act of re-entering your life as its participant, not just its observer. The choice to sit at a different table, to respond with a pause instead of a reflex, to let silence be present in a conversation rather than filling it from habit. These are small acts, but they are not meaningless. Imagine now that the trail you followed has been gently guiding you, not with force, but with familiarity. You realize you've taken 10 steps since your last real decision. That's not failure. That's the mind's nature. But the moment you see it, that's your return. That's your step back into authorship. The default is not a trap. It is simply the setting that runs when you're not looking. And once you begin to look, once you begin to feel your hand on the dial, however slightly, the direction of your life begins to shift, not with noise, not with sudden upheaval, but with quiet awareness. One moment, one breath, one step at a time. The trail has become quieter still, narrowing as it moves between rows of tall, slender trees. Their trunks rise like columns in a forgotten hall, casting soft shadows that sway as if breathing. There's a hushed quality to the space now, not empty, but held. And in this quiet, you begin to sense something delicate taking shape. Not force, not urgency, but something quieter, something easily missed. Intention. If free will had a voice, it might not be loud. It would not command or insist. It would whisper. It would ask, rather than declare. And that whisper, barely louder than your breath, is what we call intention. We often imagine willpower as a burst of energy, a sudden strength, a sharp pivot against resistance. But intention is different. It is not forceful. It does not push. It aligns. It orients. It does not demand that everything change at once. It simply invites one thing to be done on purpose. And that single purposeful act, however small, shifts the tone of everything around it. Intention lives in the space between thought and action. It is the silent answer to the question, why am I doing this? It need not be noble. It need not be complex. Even the smallest action, pouring a glass of water, choosing a word carefully, stepping outside, can become an expression of intention when done with awareness. And it is in these moments, almost invisible to the outer world, that free will finds its clearest home. Not in heroic defiance, not in grand reinvention, but in the soft, steady presence of someone choosing to live on purpose. Research into attention and mindfulness shows how often we act without noticing. We eat meals without tasting them. We scroll through screens without remembering what we've seen. We speak without knowing exactly why we're speaking. This is not weakness. It is the mind's tendency to conserve energy, to simplify, to coast. But intention interrupts the drift. It is a gentle hand on the shoulder. It does not shame or demand. It simply reminds you that you are here. And that being here means you can choose, even if only in small ways, how to engage. Intention can guide behavior more reliably than raw willpower, because where willpower depletes, intention endures. It connects action to meaning, and meaning, even in fragments, gives the mind something to return to when the noise of habit becomes loud. Imagine now as you walk that you come to a clearing with a stone placed in its center. You bend slightly, trace its surface with your fingers. There's no inscription, no direction, just presence. The act of kneeling beside it, of touching it slowly, deliberately, is an act of intention. It means nothing, and it means everything, because it wasn't automatic, it wasn't hurried, it was chosen. Intention doesn't promise control, it doesn't promise perfection, but it does change the quality of your attention, and attention, when shaped with care, becomes the field in which real choice grows. So as you continue, let the question walk beside you. What is my intention in this moment, not as pressure, but as invitation? Let it live in the background like a low hum, steady and calm. The more often you return to it, not with judgment, but with curiosity, the more the path beneath your feet begins to feel like your own. Not because it is easy or certain, but because it is walked with presence. And that presence, subtle as it may be, is one of the clearest signs that free will is not something we possess. It is something we practice. The path bends slightly now, curling around a still dark pool that lies nestled among stone and root, half forgotten but somehow impossibly clear. You approach it slowly, your steps light, as if instinctively sensing that this space holds something sacred. You stand at its edge and gaze down, not just to see your reflection, but to feel it. The surface of the water is perfectly calm, offering not a distorted image, but a true one. And what it reflects back is not just your form, but your past. The echo of choices made, of words spoken or left unsaid, of actions taken or not taken, drifts across the surface like leaves slowly circling the water. This is the place where regret lives. Regret is a complex and often uncomfortable companion. It doesn't shout, it doesn't chase, it waits, quietly, patiently. Until the moment you slow down enough to feel it, it's often misunderstood as weakness, as a sign of failure or poor judgment. But regret, in its truest form, is something else. It is a sign that you have evolved, that the person you are now knows something the person you were did not. And that knowing is what allows regret to exist. Without awareness, there would be no regret, only repetition, only sleepwalking. Regret means you have woken up. It is proof not of moral failing, but of growth. Still, it carries a weight. To regret something is to acknowledge that a different outcome may have been possible, that another path could have been taken, and that admission, no matter how gently made, can feel like a wound reopening. But if approached with care, regret is not an injury. It is an invitation. It invites you to re-enter that moment with the eyes you now have, to bring consciousness into a place where, before, there was only reaction. Not to rewrite it, not to pretend it never happened, but to understand it, to sit beside it, to listen. Psychologists distinguish between constructive regret and ruminative regret. Constructive regret is reflective. It is a process of learning, of meaning-making. It helps refine your values, clarifies your priorities, and deepens empathy for others and yourself. Ruminative regret, on the other hand, is looping and paralyzing. It fixes you in the past, replays your missteps, and silences your ability to move forward. The key difference is compassion. Regret, when paired with compassion, becomes guidance. Without compassion, it becomes punishment. And punishment, especially self-inflicted, rarely leads to real change. Imagine now that you sit at the edge of the pool, not to escape, not to wallow, but to be with your past self as they were then, uncertain, perhaps afraid, perhaps hopeful, in a quiet, desperate way. You watch them make the choice they made. You see the moment unfold, and this time you do not flinch. You simply bear witness. You understand that they did not have all the tools you now carry, that they were shaped by pressures, assumptions, fears, fatigue, that in many ways they were doing the best they could with the understanding available to them. This recognition does not erase the consequences. It does not excuse harm. But it brings humanity back into the picture. You begin to see that the value of regret is not in making us smaller, but in making us deeper. It reminds us that we are capable of more, not perfectly, not always, but enough. Enough to begin again. Enough to live differently going forward. And this is where free will breathes anew, not in being able to change the past, but in choosing how to live with it, how to respond to what it left behind, how to shape the next decision, the next moment, the next step. You rise from the water's edge and begin walking once more. The pool remains behind you, but something of it stays with you, like the sensation of having touched something honest, something unflinching and real. You do not walk faster now. You walk more clearly. With the quiet resolve of someone who knows that regret is not the end of the story, but a chapter. And the next one, still unwritten, remains within reach. Because, in truth, to feel regret is to remember that you still care, that you are still learning, that you are still alive to what matters, and that aliveness, humble and steady, is the clearest sign that choice, real, human, imperfect choice, is still possible. Always. The path now straightens, but it does not become rigid. It winds gently forward, neither steep nor flat, bordered by soft grass and trees that no longer loom but lean with quiet presence. There is no urgency in your stride now, no pressure to arrive. You are simply walking, and in that walking, something begins to settle, a feeling not of resolution, but of release. This is where acceptance begins to enter, slowly, steadily, not as surrender, not as resignation, but as a deeper kind of understanding. Acceptance is one of the most misunderstood states of mind. People often confuse it with giving up, with passivity, with the end of striving. But true acceptance is none of those things. It is not the erasure of will. It is its resting place, a place from which choice can once again emerge, not frantically, not fearfully, but with balance. In the conversation around free will, acceptance may seem like a strange guest. It doesn't argue. It doesn't demand we fight against fate, nor does it ask us to submit. What it offers is something quieter, the possibility of peace within complexity. Acceptance acknowledges that we are shaped by genes, by experience, by culture, by emotion. It acknowledges that we cannot choose our starting point or the conditions we were born into or the early patterns that wove themselves into our behavior, but it also invites us to stop blaming ourselves for being human. And in the absence of blame, something powerful becomes possible. Responsibility without shame, action without panic, decision without illusion. Acceptance is not the end of change. In many ways, it is its beginning. Because only when we accept what is without distortion or denial can we begin to move intentionally toward what might be. The psychologist Carl Rogers once said, "The curious paradox is that when I accept myself just as I am, then I can change." This is more than poetic. It is deeply psychological. Resistance binds us. Denial keeps us entangled. But acceptance loosens the grip. It gives us enough distance from the noise to hear ourselves more clearly, to sense what actually matters, to notice what, beneath all the layers, we are truly seeking. Imagine now that you are standing in an open space. You close your eyes, and for a moment, you allow everything to be just as it is. The doubts, the contradictions, the regrets, the hopes, the unknowns. You do not try to fix them. You do not try to force clarity. You just let them be. And in that stillness, you realize something surprising. The world does not collapse. The weight does not grow heavier. In fact, something lifts, not because anything has changed, but because you are no longer at war with what is. This is the geometry of acceptance. It softens the angles, removes the sharp edges from the self. It makes space, and within that space, new possibilities take root. You may still act. You may still change your mind, change your habits, change your path. But now, those actions come not from panic or urgency, but from presence. Acceptance does not erase suffering, but it removes the extra layer, the suffering that comes from resisting suffering itself. The pain of trying to be someone you're not yet ready to be. The pressure to choose perfectly, think clearly, or feel only what is acceptable. Acceptance says, you are here. That is enough. Start from here. Walk from here. And when the next choice arises, as it surely will, you may find that it arrives with less noise, less tension, less self-judgment. Because the part of you that once believed everything must be controlled is learning to let go, not of care, not of responsibility, but of the illusion that you must be more than human to be worthy of choice. You are already worthy. You have already begun. And this path, quiet and long, will continue to unfold whether or not you always know what to do. That is the promise of acceptance. Not that the way will be easy, but that you will not have to fight yourself along it. And in that ease, that softness, that quiet companionship with what is, free will begins to feel less like a burden to prove and more like a simple act of being here fully and still choosing anyway. The path narrows now, not in resistance, but in welcome. The trees grow softer, the wind gentler, and the sky above begins to darken, not with storm, but with evening. A hush falls over the landscape, not as an ending, but as a settling. The air is cool, the light dimmed, and your steps, though steady, begin to slow without effort. You've been walking for some time, through questions and reflections, through layers of mind and memory, and now you find yourself not at the end, but at a return, not to where you began exactly, but to something more essential, yourself. Along the way, we've wandered through the quiet forests of free will. We've stepped carefully over the roots of habit, emotion, memory, and culture. We've looked at the architecture of the unconscious, at the stories language tells us, at the soft but constant pull of the default. We've paused beside the mirrors of regret and stood in the stillness of acceptance. And through it all, a question remained, not loud, but present, like a gentle current running beneath the ground. Am I free? It's a question that doesn't beg for a final answer. In fact, the mind begins to soften the more it stops searching for certainty. What we've discovered is not a clean conclusion, but something quieter, something steadier, that free will may not be a moment of bold control or flawless choice. It may not be a power to do anything, be anything, at any time. Instead, it may be something smaller, something closer, the simple awareness of this breath, this step, this thought, and the space that opens when we meet each of them with presence. You are not entirely free from influence. None of us are. But within the weave of all that has shaped you, genetics, upbringing, culture, emotion, there is still a thread you hold. A thread that moves quietly through attention, through reflection, through intention. You don't have to grip it tightly. You don't have to prove anything. You simply need to notice it, to feel that in this moment you are here, alive, aware, and that is enough. The past, with all its weight and wonder, has brought you to this point. You do not need to carry it all. Let it rest now gently behind you, like leaves settling on a still pond. The future, with all its unknowns, does not ask to be solved tonight. Let it drift further out, like mist fading into the horizon. What remains is now, this breath, this body. this quiet space within and around you. And in this space, you are already home. The need to understand, to define, to resolve, that too can rest. There is no test here, no perfect answer. Only the hum of being, the slow rhythm of thought given way to stillness, the soft unfurling of muscles that no longer need to hold. Let the questions drift. Let the trail fade into dusk. Let your breath deepen and slow, like a tide receding from the shore. There is no more to do, no more to reach for. Everything you've needed to know for tonight is already with you. You've walked the full circle. You've returned, and now the mind can lie down, the body can release, and sleep, that final gentle choice of the day, can arrive without resistance. You are here, you are enough, and you are free, just as you are, in the stillness of now. Rest well.